amazing. Want to give a big thanks to you for being here and our partners at Universal Pictures for allowing us to do this screening tonight. And without further ado, we want to have a little chat here to get to know more behind what brought this incredible film together. Please welcome director, writer Kris Sanders and composer Kris Bowers. Yay. So, in fitting with the film, they all do a big ah-woo, right? So I thought we could do that, okay? We're all wild robots. How about one big ah-woo? 1, 2, 3. Yay, that felt good. I like that. Yeah. Gotta wake it up a little bit after the film. Thank you so much both for being here. This is such a treat to have you. See some of the incredible minds behind putting this together. First of all, how are you feeling right now? Everybody feels a little different when their film is like out in the world or about to come out.
Oh yeah, this is the it's coming out in a few days zone.
Exactly.
Yeah, my first movie that came out, I actually made a hole in my forehead because I just sat around scratching my forehead. I was like, why am I bleeding? I was like, yeah, so nervous, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm excited though. I'm excited. I've never been this excited about a movie coming out.
Ooh.
It's cool. So.
That's big. Wait, why do you say that?
Just for everything that I'm allowed to be such a big fan of it because there's so much that I didn't do, like the visuals, the music, and the voices. Like I got to be part of this whole thing, but I'm just a huge fan of it.
Yeah, amazing. And how about you, Kris Bowers? How are you feeling?
Yeah, I'd say the same. I think just excited for people to continue to see this amazing world that was built, and like from the moment I saw the first piece of concept art when we had our first meeting, I was excited about the world seeing it, and that was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm excited. My wife already saw it, so now I'm a little less nervous.
Yeah, your wife saw it.
But yeah, I'm really excited.
What about your daughter's 2.5? Did she see it?
It's funny. She's only seen little sections of it.
Yeah.
Early on, I showed her a few sections, and I showed her the thorn bear chase, and my wife was like, "Oh no!" And so I haven't showed her that much of it. But we were saying backstage, what's funny is that I every now and then will be drawing with her, and I'll start drawing Ross, and she's like, "Are you drawing a robot?" She thinks that's the only way to draw a robot.
Oh, that's so cute. I mean, it's really cool because this is she may still be a little bit young to see it, but this is your first animated film that you've done the composing for. And so it's kind of like maybe one of the first films she could actually watch that Dad's done.
Yeah, exactly. Something I'd be really excited for her to see and really proud to be a part of.
Yeah.
And, yeah, really excited for that.
Kris, you're both Kris. Kris with a C, Kris Sanders. It was amazing. I was looking back on all the films you've been a part of throughout the many decades that you've been doing this, whether you've been creating the characters that have been in the films or directed or written it. And I was like, oh my God, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, Mulan. And I was like, that's my childhood. And now here, with the new generation of, people of all ages watching it, but also now there's new generations of kids that can enjoy this film. It must be incredible to look back on this career that you've had, and you've been in so many different roles too, from voicing the characters to creating them to then directing and writing.
Yeah, every single thing I've worked on has taught me something that I've used for the very next thing I've done, and I think that there was no greater learning curve, I think, than really being in the story department at Disney when we were working on Beauty and the Beast, because I worked with I think some of the very best story people there ever have been, like Joe Ranft, Ed Gombert, Brenda Chapman, Roger Allers, etc., and just learned the craft of story. And I've really never left. Anything I do, it all leads back to story. So that's what makes me feel comfortable. When I was just talking a minute ago, the background painting and stuff, I just come to everything from the standpoint of story and let everybody do what they do and not interfere or try to board their craft. I stay in my lane and stories where I learned my craft, so I stay there.
And this was a great story to start with. I was talking to some folks before watching the film, and one girl was saying that she read the books first and was here to see the film. And I'm curious how you came across the story to begin with.
I was story adjacent and didn't know it because a lot of kids read it in school at a certain grade, and my daughter had read it, and it was in the vicinity, but I never really opened it. And I went to DreamWorks one day looking for whatever my next gig was, and amongst the things they had in development was this wonderful book. And the briefest description of it let me know that that was the one I was interested in. And so once I started in writing, I mentioned it to Nicole, and she said, "Oh, I read that book, remember?" And she pulled it off the shelf. I'm like, yes, now I remember. It was in the vicinity. I never saw it till later, so.
Oh, that's amazing. So along the way, has Nicole given you any feedback? Like, oh no, that's not how it is in the book. It needs to be like this.
I let her know what I was up to, and I let her know certain characters were being trimmed back and why, because I want her to sort of understand the story process as well.
Yeah.
So we talked about, I talked to her about what I was up to and such.
Yeah. So as we mentioned before, it was Kris Bowers' first time composing for an animated film. You've been working in animated film for a long time. How did you know that he would be able to do this?
Universal got us together. They looked at what we were doing, and they were like, Kris Bowers is the perfect voice for this music. And I was familiar with Kris's music, but I went back and re-listened to like King Richard, etc. And indeed, it was just the right tone. It was very strong, but it had the right sort of gentleness here and there, and just Kris can explain it better than I can. But yes, the character of Kris's music was such a beautiful fit. That I was immediately excited about the idea.
And what did you all decide that you were going for together in those first conversations? I mean, you knew that it had the right feeling to it, but what was in the conversations of like the feeling that you wanted? Because the interesting thing too is, we mentioned the books. The books, they have pictures, they have lines that are read, but there's no music, there's no sound whatsoever. So that is something that you're totally reimagining. And I'm curious what the goal was that you guys first started talking about there.
Yeah, I think one of the things we first touched on was just how grounded the story is, and how we're not dealing with these topics with kid gloves in terms of talking about death and talking about the complexity of being a parent and any of those kinds of things, and also Kris talking about kindness being at the core of this idea of kindness as a survival technique. And those things felt like they were for me, the core memories from that first meeting was just how much the music needed to really treat this very seriously, and not be just for a kiddie animated movie in terms of like the way that the score was going to be used, and also talked a lot about there not being very much dialogue, and there being a lot of moments where score was going to have to kind of carry a lot of the emotional weight in moments because it would be pretty silent otherwise. And that felt really exciting for me, not only as a composer, but also as a fan of music for animation, for early animation, where a lot of it was no dialogue at all, and music's doing all of this heavy lifting in terms of conveying emotion and telling story and all of that. And so for me, I was really excited by the challenge to figure out how to make sure that the music could rise to that occasion.
Yeah, let's talk about these fabulous characters in this film. Oh my God, so many characters to fall in love with. I could go into each one of their own universes, you know what I mean? Like I could watch a whole film about the possum family. Also, I want to say thank you for like showing that possums are cute, because a lot of people hate on possums out there in the world, and they're like, ew, possums are very sweet. They do not carry rabies. They just mind their business. They eat bugs. So hopefully if you were, thinking that they're not a good thing, you have been turned to the other side, the correct side. Right? I'm right? But yeah, so many incredible characters, and I understand there was 47 species made for the film, which is incredible by the people, everybody who's developing the characters. So lovable, all their quirks. And I'm curious, many of us have heard when an actor goes into a role, there is like a whole backstory created about that role. Do you do the same thing with these animal roles, where there's like, you present to like Lupita the whole backstory of Roz, and then they like develop their character from there?
Yeah, Roz was an especially interesting case. In the case of the animals, they do have backstories, and they have roles that they play in the story, and so we would define those as much as we can before we attach to an actor. And then once the actor signs on, I will immediately go back and do my best to customize that dialogue, just trying to anticipate their voice, but I'll never anticipate everything. There's a lot of invention actually in the booth. In the case of Roz, that was a whole different thing. The architecture of Roz's mind was not something that we had really defined, and we worked together. We collaborated from the very beginning to figure out, like, where does Roz begin, where does she end, and how does she see the world? And it was fascinating to me to work with Lupita and watch her take everything apart and just try to understand what Roz sees, how she sees things, and how she dissects the world and explains it. And when she, for example, learns from the animals, like, there's a moment where Fink says, look, you got to learn how things work on this island, and kindness is not a survival skill. And she says, you're programming. And so she's trying to put things immediately in terms that she understands. Because she doesn't know everything. She has a lot that she's going to learn and grow, with. So that was a very particular challenge, and it was ongoing. I never left a recording session without notes that I would then apply to other scenes with Roz, and then we'd bring that back and we might reiterate that scene as we go into new scenes as well. So there was a lot of defining and invention that Lupita in particular took the lead in.
Wow. And is there a similar process for you too, Kris, with the music? Is it like maybe you create one thing and then the character changes a little bit or something, and you have to change even the theme of that character when it changes from this side? I keep wanting to say Kris and then Kris, so like, Kris's side.
I think that in the beginning I really just focused on palette and wanted to find a way to represent like the organic aspect of the wild in an interesting way, and talked to Kris about having this interesting approach to percussion, because I felt like having ethnic flutes would all of a sudden make me think like, well, where are we, or what culture are we talking about? So for me, focusing on like interesting percussion, there's this percussion ensemble that we worked with, Sandbox Percussion, where they're playing like literally on like tree branches and like cans and pieces of metal that they've tuned to specific notes and things.
Yeah.
And so the first thing I did, I wrote a couple of pieces that were just primarily trying to find a palette for that and a palette for Roz and universal dynamics in this like technological world and this futuristic sound. And then I started writing themes, and the first theme that I wrote was the main theme, and it was for the migration sequence. And really it was about my thought was, if we work on each of the themes, like the main theme, Roz's theme, Bright Bill's theme, and Fink's theme, then I could then look at the rest of the film and set up these pillars essentially where those themes are kind of having a big moment, and then kind of color around it and build from that way. So having that approach allows us to iterate on those themes while they're continuing to build stories. So I'm not getting too in the weeds of like, oh, I scored this whole first half of the movie and now we feel differently about what it's supposed to be. But creating that main theme, I feel like, was the biggest challenge, just because it was my first approach wasn't the right feeling, and our conversations about it allowed me to think about it in a much deeper way that got to where we eventually got to.
When you say the main scene, do you mean the first scene, or?
No, the main theme for the migration sequence. So
gotcha.
Bright Bill finally flies away.
Right, and there's so much story being told through the music itself in that scene, so you really had to get it right.
Yeah, like basically when I first wrote that piece of music, it was early in the process. My daughter was only like 7 months old, and I remember...
She's now 2.5, by the way.
2.5. I remember writing the theme and having this feeling of like, I'm thinking about this idea of dropping her off at college, and I feel like all these emotions. And I played it for Kris, and what's funny though is that he was like, this isn't really right. The right feeling. And then Kris was like, imagine that you're dropping Coda off for college. And I was like, that's what I imagined. I'm not really sure what's going on here. And then we talked about it, and Kris reminded me of the complexity of what's happening in that moment, and that, that the challenges that they're having in their relationship, and imagining saying goodbye under those circumstances. And I remember going home and recognizing for myself that I didn't want to imagine saying goodbye to her in that way. Yeah. And it was like very, very difficult for me to think, like my first version, if you heard that piece of music, it was very sweet and very nostalgic, and very naive in terms of like.
Well, he's been a dad longer than you.
Exactly, yeah. But thinking about like, you know, what it's gonna be like to like unintentionally fail her as a father, and like, you know, to
like therapy.
But to like go to that place emotionally, and then that's when I started writing this other piece of music and brought that to Kris, and once he heard that theme or the seed of it, really, he was then encouraging me to write away from picture. And he was like, don't worry, like we'll build the scene around the music. You go and write something and that you feel like really evokes the feeling that you're kind of chasing in that moment. Yeah.
I was, do you want to say something?
I was going to say, I was deathly afraid of, there was early on, we were listening to a score being laid down, and we were there at the recording, and it was the first score to a film I had like directed, and there was this theme that took hold, and it was beginning to develop, and the theme suddenly ducked down because here comes a line of dialogue. You know, and it had to, so the music was maneuvering around things that I had left that were cluttering up. And that was one thing I was deathly afraid of, cluttering up anything about what Kris was doing. And I was like, that's why I was like, at this point, yeah, forget the picture and just make this as big and bold and let it grow full scale. And then we'll come in and we'll follow that.
Such a cool dance between the two things, going back and forth. I did want to ask something funny. When I was watching it, I was thinking like that the different characters reminded me of people that I've come across in real life. And you're really intimate with these characters because like you've developed them. And I was wondering, I mean, and you've been doing it for a long time. Do you go out in the world and you're like, oh my God, that woman reminds me of, you know, like real people? Or even in your family, you're like, oh, you're being very Fink right now.
Definitely, there's moments where people do things. I'm like, I must remember this. I like that when people are like illogical and like don't, because I think it's very important for like a character not to become two-dimensional and just become too consistent. Like, well, that character wouldn't do that. Like, you want them to be a strong character, than a character you can hold on to, but it's okay then to have them reveal other aspects so they become more dimensional. And like, I think Fink is a really good example of that. I really liked the idea, of course, of a fox being a fox and taking advantage of a situation that was laid at his feet. So he's fairly self-serving and conniving, and he manipulates Roz, but very quickly begins to reveal that he himself has a lot of damage inside, and that's why he's going to start like attaching himself to Roz in a much more like, I think, needy maybe way.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, I mean, visually, just so stunning. There was moments where I forgot that it was animated. It looked like a documentary or something, and I was like, oh, that's, you know. And there was so much love, I will say, put into creating this world, aside from the lines and the music. And there was one thing that I thought was interesting, which is the story itself is sort of this intersection of like the natural world and technology and things that are like not organic or whatever. And it seemed like you had a similar approach with how you created the world, which is there's sort of this collaboration between the traditional and the technologically advanced to create what it looks like to us. Can you tell us a little bit about your approach, your technique?
Yeah, and I'd say that the visuals and Kris's music are a very good match. There was a level of sophistication that I wanted for the visuals, because I wanted people to see this film the right way, because it was a very sophisticated story being told with really cute, fanciful creatures. And if we had adhered to, I think, like CG films the way they had been for a long time, it would have been seen as maybe, it would have come off too young immediately. So I was just really, really lucky that I was at a studio where they'd made some huge leaps getting away from that traditional CG style and into a more illustrated look. And I asked Ramon Zibach, our production designer, we had some wonderful, wonderful sketches that were being created by some of our Viz Dev artists, Daniel Coucou in particular, and he had this very loose impressionistic style. And I asked Ramon, I pointed to those particular paintings and said, can our finished film look fairly indiscernible from those explorations? Which were much softer than the stuff that they had developed for Bad Guys and Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. And he said, yeah, let's go for it. So we leveraged off of that technology to go much, much further. And they actually were able to create a system by which they could paint dimensionally. Wow. So they could now basically paint in space. And if you look at the flowers and the plants, there will be just little brush strokes for those things, and they're dimensional, so we can light them and we can move around them, but we didn't need to build structure underneath them. So it really freed everything up, and I would say it was a return to where animation started. When I was just starting out, everything was hand painted and everything was hand drawn, and there's an analog warmth that comes from that there is no substitute for. So this film actually like reconnected with that, because everything in here is painted by hand. Even the surfaces of the characters, those are brush strokes that were it took a while to define exactly where they were and how they worked. And one of the interesting things, and the reason I think you see it the way you do, I'll talk about Fink just for a second. A traditional CG character, if you got really close to Fink's fur and his tail, you'd see every single little hair, almost like he just came from like a salon and you got blow dry, right? And animals in nature aren't like that. They have matted fur that is all matted down, and they have these breaks in their fur when they turn their head and things. And the brush strokes created that matted look. So the weird thing that happened that I did not plan for was that the overall effect of going to this more painterly, handmade look was that it seems more photoreal and believable than the photoreal stuff you get from CG traditional, if that makes sense. It's a weird effect I didn't expect.
Yeah, it makes sense, and also like it does and it doesn't. But I know when I saw that I liked, you know what I mean? Like, yes, do it some more. I've also seen you reference some other places like Monet and how you approach Claude Monet with like the painting style, and even Miyazaki, which I thought was really cool. If you've seen any Miyazaki films, Kris was thinking about that as well, sort of like on a vision board, we'll say, right? Like,
yeah, I think that would be our aspiration would be to like the looseness of a Monet with the I think Tyrus Wong's really soft treatments on the original Bambi backgrounds, and then of course the immersive effect that you get from Miyazaki's films as well.
So good. One thing I want to ask you, which I was like giggling, but I was like, I don't know if Kris did that or not. There's a part where Fink falls onto the porcupine, and he's covered in quills. And then Roz goes to pick out the quills, and it's the plucking sound of like a string instrument. Was that you?
Yeah.
Yay! Was that so much fun?
Yeah, I mean, I think, kind of inspired by how much detail Kris and Ramon and everybody on the animation side was going with that, honoring the tradition of not only animation, but also just like visual art on that depth. With that depth, I think, for me, I was inspired to go that deep with the score as well, just because I was always inspired by the scores that were super intentional. Like, my favorite composer is John Williams, because he's thinking about every single note, and like, you hear something that seems really simple, and you actually look at it, and there's all this other movement that's happening, and that's actually what's causing this other feeling for you. And so for me, I felt like, approaching the score, it really needed to have that level of detail and intention and refinement over the course of the couple of years we're working on it. There were so many times where Kris would approve a cue, and then I'd see the new animation, and I'd be like, no, we have to adjust some other things because there's this new color thing that's happening here, or new like lighting, and that's affecting how I want to approach this. And so every single detail was really intentional and specific.
I do want to ask, for people that are definitely going to be watching it again, which I watched it first on my computer with like a watermark on it, totally different experience. It's like I watched a different film, and I have to watch it again because I noticed so many things that I missed the first time around. Are there any like Easter eggs that we should be looking for when we watch it again?
Yes. The one that I always forgot to mention that I'm now mentioning because it was hilarious to me, at the end of the movie, in the bit where Roz is talking to all the animals and she's laid that whole thing on them that she's going to take off, the animals were super sad, and I was in Color Dailies and we were looking at the animation, and I was looking at all these animals, and up in the upper right, amongst the animals that had gathered, was a fish that was just sitting on the ground. Is that a fish? who stuck the fish in? And I was like, you know what? The fish can stay, but somebody needs to be carrying it. It didn't get there by itself. And I was like, oh, put it in a raccoon's arms. And then I told Jess, my wife, that night, she's like, you should have put it in an otter's arms. I'm like, oh, and we were so out of time, I couldn't switch it to an otter.
How great are those raccoons too? Geez, so many amazing animals. We were just off stage too, talking about the raccoons, and you said there was, in that one scene on the tree where all the raccoons are there, and then they go, whee, they like fly off. How many were those?
When they are thrown into the air, there are 991.
991, not 1,000.
Why didn't you add 9 more?
And then also, I just want to, there's like incredible numbers here. 80,000 butterflies towards the beginning when Roz puts her hand on the tree. They made 80,000 butterflies. Like, oh, the textures, the levels. Thank you so much, y'all. This was incredible. Congratulations on this victory. The Wild Robot. And want to thank you all for coming out and staying for the chat. Really appreciate it. Wild Robot is out in theaters this Friday, September 27th. So please go out and tell your friends to watch. Go watch it again. And also want to thank our partners at Universal Pictures. Thanks so much. Have a great night.